We have a wonderful program tonight with Jeanne Shenandoah and Sally Roesch Wagner that is fitting for Women's History Month, as well as this series. Before introducing our speakers, let me say a word about the series. This is the largest collaboration I've been involved in almost 20 years in Syracuse that includes faculty from both Syracuse University and Environmental Sciences and Forestry School, as well as community groups. The nation has really brought us together in an unprecedented way. The purpose of this series is to provide information for the whole community about the Onondaga land rights claim, which affects all of us, and also to make a space for public discussion about it. We will have events focused on the specifics of the land claim, but the claim also must be understood in its historical, political, and cultural context. I want to just say one word about why the Women's Studies program wanted to support this whole series. There's a common idea that the movement for women's equality began among Europeans and then has spread elsewhere. That idea is historically inaccurate, and it also has some unfortunate ramifications for how we think about who we have to learn from, who are the teachers, and who are the learners among us. So we in the Women's Studies program want to help correct the story of women's history. Okay, let me introduce our speakers now. We will have time for questions and discussion after the presentation. Our two speakers are Jeanne Shenandoah and Sally Roesch Wagner. Jeanne Shenandoah is a member of the Eel clan from the Onondaga Nation. She's been a traditional home birth midwife and herbalist for 23 years. She is a mother and a grandmother, and she works at the Onondaga Nation Communications Office, and she describes herself as involved with spiritual and political activities of her people and following the traditional ways. She has spent most of her life being involved with people, helping people obtain knowledge to maintain who they are. She serves on the Haudenosaunee Environmental Task Force and is former vice president of the Matilda Joslyn Gage Foundation. Sally Roesch Wagner was one of the first women to receive a doctorate for work in women's studies in the United States from the University of California, Santa Cruz in 1978. She is also a founder of one of the country's first women's studies programs at California State University in Sacramento. She was a women's studies professor for 34 years and now is the executive director of the Gage Foundation in Fayetteville, New York, and she really is the nation's foremost authority on Matilda Joslyn Gage. So please join me in welcoming our speakers tonight, Jeanne Shenandoah and Sally Roesch Wagner.
If you were Lucretia Mott in 1848, you came from Philadelphia and came to the Seneca Nation and spent a good bit of time there, watching as the nation was deciding if it would continue in its traditional governmental and spiritual ways or if it would adopt a system similar to the United States. You were a Quaker, a member of the Philadelphia Friends Meeting, and the energy that you brought from that experience of watching women taking part as full, equal partners in the decision and also planning the spiritual ceremony that went on at the time she was there. You came to a meeting with an old friend that you'd known or met 8 years before, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and together you planned what was the first Women's Rights Convention, as far as we know, in the United States. If you were Elizabeth Cady Stanton, you had an uncle who spoke the Oneida language fluently. Your cousin, Garrett Smith, the son of Peter Smith, the Oneida speaker, was always welcoming a number of people to his home in Peterborough, including fugitive slaves, Native people, and as Elizabeth Cady Stanton's husband Henry said, radical reformers of every ilk. You would see Oneida women there, or you would see Onondaga women, if you were Elizabeth Cady Stanton, living in Seneca Falls in 1848, at the home of your nearest neighbor, who Orrin Tyler had run a trading post at the Onondaga Nation and spoke Onondaga fluently. And whenever the newspapers reported his Onondaga relatives came to visit, they stayed with him. Or you might have seen Seneca women selling their baskets on the streets of Seneca Falls, as they always did. If you were Matilda Joslyn Gage, you might leave your home at 210 East Genesee and travel to the Onondaga Nation for ceremony. You knew a number of the people at Onondaga by name. Some of them came to visit you in your home. And Matilda Joslyn Gage was, in 1878, the editor of a women's rights paper here in Syracuse at a time when the state of New York was considering a bill that would force citizenship on Indian men, on the Haudenosaunee. The chiefs met in council at the nation and decided that they would not accept citizenship, that they were citizens of their own nations, and Matilda Joslyn Gage wrote an editorial in support of their decision in her women's rights paper, and she said, isn't it the height of hypocrisy that the government, which is denying citizenship to its women citizens who are demanding it, is attempting to force citizenship on Indian men, the better to steal their lands. Justice to the Indians requires living up to the treaties that have been made with them, and to force citizenship on them would be equivalent to forcing it on Canadians or Mexicans, because the members of the Six Nations of the Haudenosaunee are equally sovereign nations with Canada and Mexico. Now the story for me was, how did this connection be made? You know, how was this connection made? How did Native and non-Native women know each other? What did non-Native women see when they saw Haudenosaunee women? And first I want to just very quickly go over with you to remind you of what it was for non-Native women, citizens of the United States in the state of New York in, say, 1848. First of all, you wore a dress, you wore a long skirt, and underneath you corseted. And you corseted to a tiny waist, and you, as a result, couldn't take a deep breath. You suffered a number of physical complaints, and women died in childbirth as a result of the corseting that forced their vital organs downward and made childbirth a very dangerous procedure. You also, in addition to your dress, which was both symbolic and also it kept you literally in your place, the law and the church made sure that you knew what your place was. Common law was based on canon law, and under canon law, essentially the two shall become one and the one is the man, and that was the basis of common law in terms of women. So that when Blackstone's Code was adopted after the Revolutionary War in this country, it meant that women once married were dead in the law, was the phrase. It wasn't that they had no rights, they simply ceased to exist legally. The two became one and the one was the man. That meant that you had no rights to your children, and the extreme examples were things like a husband in this area who knew he was dying, and Matilda Joslyn Gage wrote this story, wanted someone else to take care of this child once it was born, and so he willed this child away from the mother. He died, the mother gave birth to the child, and the child was taken away from her. She had absolutely no legal right to the child. He appointed someone else as guardian, and the law, of course, recognized that. Husbands had the legal and the spiritual, not just right, but responsibility to chastise their wives, to make sure that their wives were obedient. If, as the Bible literally understood says, that the husband stands in relation to the wife as the wife stands, or has the wife stands in relation to the husband as the husband stands in relation to Christ. So the husband is the Lord and Master. And from Genesis to St. Paul, the theme recurs that she is to be subservient to him and she is to be obedient to him. In the 19th century, when you married, the wife did say that she would obey the husband. That was part of the marriage ceremony. So the responsibility of the husband was to ensure that his wife would make it to heaven. And if, in fact, she died in disobedience to him, she would not go to heaven. And so he had the obligation, if you will, to ensure her spiritual survival, and that meant making sure that she never was in a state of disobedience to him. And so husbands could beat their wives, and Supreme Court in one of the southern states in the 1870s heard a case where a woman had been severely beaten by her husband, but the Supreme Court said that he had not broken a law, because unless permanent injury was inflicted, he was certainly within his rights as a husband, and for the court to intervene in this case would be to upset, they said, the domestic tranquility of the home. You had no right to your property, you had no right to your wages. Whatever you brought into the marriage became the property of your husband's to do with as he would. And there were, well, I won't go into the examples of it. You probably are all aware of them. Elizabeth Cady Stanton put it this way, that even if a woman is an heiress and an incredibly wealthy property owner, she, once she marries, becomes penniless and homeless. And this, in fact, she had seen these cases when her father was an attorney and she was a small child, and she would hide out in his office and listen to the women crying when they left his office, and he could do nothing about it because the law allowed the husband to have all of his wife's property and wages, everything she had. So the condition of women in the 19th century was, of course, one of being political slaves as well. Women had no say in government in any of its levels. They could not testify in court. They could not sue or be sued. They could not vote. So the condition of women being virtually, once married, non-existent, was held to be both God's divine plan and biologically an imperative, that this is just simply how women are. They are helpless, they are dependent, they cannot survive on their own, and so the creation of male and female in their biological essence dictates that the husband must be the responsible person and she must be the submissive person. So how do you break through this? You've got church, you've got state, you've got social order, all science as it emerges, all saying the same thing, and saying that if a woman is dissatisfied with this position and wants to do something about it, she is unnatural biologically, she is blasphemous religiously, she is a heretic, and she's not going to be a good wife and mother. Now, what happened when these women living under these conditions saw Haudenosaunee women? What did they see?
So I guess you have to think about how these women came into our communities. and what they say, saw a large number of these women that were involved in organizing for women's rights around the Seneca Falls time, where the majority of them were the wives of missionaries who had moved into our communities. So they didn't just observe from the outside, they were living inside of our community, so they saw how things were working there. First of all, I should tell you that our people are matrilineal. We're born into clan families. The Onondaga Nation here has 9 clan families, and all of the children are born into the mother's clan, regardless of who the father is. You follow the clan family of your mother. So probably these women came into the communities and were astounded to see that women had equal rights. And I shouldn't say just women, I should say everybody, all the people. Nobody was ever treated like they were more than another person. Everybody was on equal responsibility, an equal level. Everybody had opportunity to voice their opinions and take part in any kind of gatherings where people needed to make decisions or to speak. First of all, I should tell you that the clan families that we have are very large extended families. And each clan has this woman who usually, but not always, is one of the oldest women in this family, and she's somebody that's been chosen by the people to represent them, to look out for, a person that is looked at for the way that she's led her life and been responsible and respectful and considerate to all the people, a person who has shown good human traits. So this woman is chosen, and she helps to make a decision in talking along with the people in her clan to choose who our person will be, that most of you know of as the chief, or you think of him as like the head of our family, where actually who he is he's the spokesperson, and also the person that watches out for all the people that belong to this clan, this large extended family. He and this woman work together and make sure, watch out for everybody's well-being, all the people, men, women, and children, and they make sure that our ceremonies are done properly and at the right time. They must be a very good spiritual person, because they have the responsibility of making sure that our ceremonies are done properly and that all of our people learn the proper procedures and the ways to conduct their ceremonies when the proper time is. So it's a pretty big job that takes all of one's personal life to take this position, and they're normally not, like I said, set aside as someone different than the rest of the people. So these 2 people would be the spokespeople for the whole family. The whole clan would gather and discuss issues, and so those women probably came and saw this, where everybody had an equal voice and everybody had a right to everything. And since we are matrilineal people, the women had the right to I guess you would want to think about it as owning property. Although most of our property is held in common. For instance, here at Onondaga Nation, nearby here, the whole of our property is held in common by the whole community. You might take a portion of it where your home is and say, this is my yard or this is my garden, but you actually can't go out and sell it out to real estate or something, because it belongs to all of us. It belongs to us communally. That's probably another thing those women saw, and they probably also saw the issues around food, where our people have always been agricultural type people. We are not nomadic. We've stayed in our Aboriginal territories in villages for a pretty long length of time and had some really extensive gardens and fruit orchards, and so they probably saw this. So women had a lot to do with the food, but I don't think it was basically women. Sometimes I think people are looking for the word of the women have the power or something, but it's not like that at all. It's more equality. People share it together. There shouldn't. It's not a proper human balance if somebody would have the power over someone else. We're all equally human people, and we all share responsibilities of living together in a community. I think that's what those women also saw, which was a lot of change for them, and also the fact that the children follow the clan family for their identification, as opposed to the women not having any right to their own natural-born children being given away from them. Those are probably some of the things that they've seen that help them to strive for this equality for themselves.
One of the issues that seems to be a difference between communities is that in European-based societies, the concept of justice is based on being the same. And so to make a claim for justice, you have to show that you're exactly the same. And so women's rights started out thinking that they had to show that we're the same as men in all respects in order to be able to claim a right to justice. So we tended to downplay any differences between men and women, and are still afraid of talking about differences between men and women because we're afraid they'll put us in a pumpkin again. As Sally described it so well. But one of the things that I find interesting about the Haudenosaunee that we can learn from is that there seems to be, on the one hand, a notion that all human beings are the same, and on the other hand, a notion that there is a gender difference, that women and men have different roles, and women and men have different sorts of work in some cases. So I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about the differences, the different roles or economic work that men and women play in the nation, and how that's understood politically.
Well, there is a difference between men and women. Lo and behold, we are women and they're men. You know, we have children. We have children. We have certain instincts that women basically have. Some men do too. I mean, we all have kind of the same thing, but some have more than the other. Is that what you mean? Like the women, you would naturally take care of children, give birth to children, and they say the men would go out hunting or doing things like this. And then the gardening, they say, oh, the women were all out there taking care of all the gardens. I'm sure that was true to a certain extent. But I also think that everybody took care of the gardens. I mean, that's major work, you know, especially if you didn't have a rototiller or anything like that. That was a lot of work in order to secure your food supply for a whole cycle, much less put food away for the future, because one of our main teachings is to take care of ourselves and feed ourselves and be able to feed ourselves for so many cycles of the future. So that was a lot of work. I think there were definitely different things that were there. We have a division. We have a lot of things like personal ceremonies that we do for each other, and some that the men would do more some things that they would do within our ceremonies, and they would take the young boys with them, and they would learn their parts. The women would learn their portions. I don't want to be specific about that, but there were many instances where there were different, I guess you would call them duties or responsibilities to the different genders. But I don't think everything all is completely cut and dried and separated like that, like some people would like to think. Even to this day, you go into a lot of households, men and women would share equal responsibility in caring for small children. Yeah. But no, it's a constant daily struggle, and we have to begin with the very beginning, you know, and there are a number of people here in the audience I see now that realize what we're talking about and do the same thing themselves, because you have to think about from the very moment that your child is born, or maybe even before that, you think about this person and you have good feelings and good thoughts. And the people in our community do that for each other. We take care of each other, and we think well of each other, and we care about what's happening. And then this person is born. This is your opportunity to make a difference in this whole world by this brand new person here. So the first thing we do within our people, at the first opportunity that we have a ceremony coming up, we give this person a name in our language, and that helps to set their identity right there. That person has a name, and that's who you belong to. This is your clan, this is your clan family, and you're all these people. You're part of it. You belong here. You have an equal right to be on this earth as anybody else, and you're surrounded by all these people who are thankful for your presence, and we all give thanks for your being there, and we all know who you are. And so we have to keep that in our mind all the time. And you could go to Onondaga Nation and speak to any number of those young people, and they'll tell you who their name is, and they know who they are. They know what nation they are. They know their clan. And we bring them to our ceremonies. We have certain ceremonies, and it's very hard to describe the wonderful feelings that we have. We have a building, a longhouse that we gather in for spiritual gatherings, and it can be just all crowded and full of people, all happy and smiling, and all thinking about the same thing at the same time, being thankful, giving words of thanksgiving, and taking part in a celebration of Thanksgiving, doing singing songs and doing dances as a whole group of people. As many of you people probably realize that things that you do in large groups are very strong, like if a whole group of people were to pray together or all think about the same thing, that's very, very strong. You know, that's what we do. It's a daily constant thinking about being thankful and who we are.
You know, the women who went to visit at Onondaga, there was a woman, one of the women was Miss Remington. She was a teacher at the Nation, and she described in the 1880s the incredible difference between being on the Nation and being in Syracuse. It was more than 12 minutes away then, but you know, it was like a whole different world, because she said, on the Nation I can go anywhere I want, any time of the day or night, with absolute absence of fear. And in Syracuse, that was and is not the case.
Sally, I know that you spent decades in academia. Yeah, it's me.
It's you.
It's me. I know you spent decades in academia, and we've had this conversation a couple times, but I want to pin you down, and I want you to make a commitment. I'm going to try and get a commitment. Are you making the claim here tonight, and have you made it in your writing, that the inspiration for the women's movement in this country emerged from contact with the native peoples of this country?
I'm uncomfortable with you know, clearly there were a number of influences, but how did the women get the courage to think that the world could be different and they could create a different world? I think that's what they saw with the Haudenosaunee, and I think that's what sparked the vision. That's what gave them the strength to try it, to do it. And I don't think, and I'd go beyond that, I don't think it was just women's rights. it was at a time when Matilda Joslyn Gage writes about visiting Onondaga and visiting with Aunt Dinah, who she said was, the paper said was 101, but, she said she may be 125. I mean, she was really, this is a time when people in Syracuse died when they were 50. So how do these people close by live twice as long as we do? Well, they didn't eat fried foods and wash it down with whiskey. They ate fresh fruits and vegetables and whole grains, and so the food reform movement that sprang up in this area was white people eating like Indians. The health reform movement, instead of bleeding somebody, who was sick and giving them mercury and calomel and everything comes out of both ends, and you're dehydrated and you die, and then take some more blood out right before the end. Instead of that, they did herbs, they did water, they treated themselves medically. They took baths. White people really smelled when they came here. They didn't bathe. And they wouldn't eat fresh fruits and vegetables. Anyway, I think it wasn't it was dress reform. Why did all of the radical reform movements spring up in this area? Well, I don't think it was the water. I don't think it was the religious evangelism, which is the current theory in academia. If you scratch a radical reformer, you come up with somebody that is attacking organized religion in ways that today I couldn't even repeat their words because they are so absolutely, inflammatory. I don't think it was that. I think it was, you live around people, you see that, they got a good recipe. Can I have your recipe? You live among people that are living a way that makes a whole lot more sense and looks a whole lot better than the way you're living, and you pick it up. I think it's as simple as that.
I thank both of you ladies for being here this evening. I certainly learned something that the public school books left out. My question goes to Jeanne and Shenandoah. Look, please, both of you, if you can answer it for me, what relationship did the African American have with the Onondaga Indian yesterday? What relationship do you have with them today?
Oh, I don't know if I can answer it as a whole. Friendship on my part. I can't speak exactly for the whole nation. I have a number of very good friends that are African American, and I think in the past also there were some alliances because that happens when both peoples are oppressed, and also when people came to this area looking for freedom. Some of our people afforded them a few places to stay. I've heard some of the stories. I can't exactly verify them because we don't have a written history, but there are some stories that have been passed on.
Thank you.
Can I add one?
Yeah.
Vanessa Johnson came up with this remarkable piece of information. Jermaine Logan was the head of the Underground Railroad. He's an African-American minister, head of the Underground Railroad in Syracuse. And when his wife died, a group of women from Onondaga came and did a wake. So that would indicate a really strong connection.
Jeanne, I'd like to ask you a question about midwifery. How did you come about your skill? Is that a tradition that was passed down in your culture specifically? And do you interact with New York State at all, influenced by the state in your practice of midwifery?
I don't know how I came by midwifery. I think it was just my path in life. We have a saying that when a person is given their name, I was telling you, given their name as an infant, and it depends on how it's translated, and that would help a person find their path. And my name kind of, in a broad translation, kind of says that she takes care of things, so I somehow couldn't help but get involved in a lot of different stuff. In the first place, I'm the oldest of 10 children. So I spent a lot of my lifetime helping my mother care for the other children. And then I went on to have mine. my own. And my mother was raised by her grandmother, who had been one of the last midwives in our home birth midwives in our community and a basket maker. And I always held those stories about her, and the few memories that I have of her are very dear to me. So I guess that kind of must have sparked something. So somehow along the line, I always wanted to have my children at home, but there wasn't anybody to help me. So when I finally started meeting women of thinking the same way, and we kind of found some people to help us to learn things, and I spent a lot of time going around visiting with elderly women and talking to them. And from the time that we did our first home birth at Onondaga Nation, there was a span of 40 years. And when they had stopped the home birth, there was when the first Onondaga County Health nurses came into our community and, you know, told people it was dirty and illegal and all this stuff that threatened them with arrest. So also being a young person and full of energy, and somebody told me it was illegal. So it's very difficult to say exactly where. I had been several times and offered a full scholarship to go to a regular school and be a licensed midwife and everything, but myself and several others had refused it because at that point in time we felt very strongly and sure of what we were doing, and we didn't need anybody to change our minds. And I always knew I had a fair amount of intelligence, so I could kind of learn most of that stuff on my own anyways. And no, I never had any interaction with New York State whatsoever, although I purposely set myself out in the front several times, kind of inviting them to. I would have loved to have some interchange with them, because the Department of Education had begun attacking some of my friends in this area who had been practicing midwifery along with me, but they never came about. I was waiting for about 28 years, given ample opportunity, but no, I haven't had any interaction with them. I was in a couple of organizations that were attempting to change some laws within New York State having to do with home birth midwifery, but were very unsuccessful, and actually some of the women had left this area because they had been so harassed, intimidated, and all that. But
Sally, you mentioned balance and harmony in terms of Stanton and Anthony, and in terms of everyday life, and today with women's lives being so much more fast-paced, everything is accelerated, families are more fragmented. How does one achieve balance and harmony, or is there some kind of formula in terms of overall harmony of the spirit, the body, the mind, that type of thing? Did they have any theories on that?
I think that the 19th century and the second wave of feminism both agreed or came to on their own separately that there are no personal solutions, that, you know, the only solutions that really work are institutional ones. Gage's vision, and I'll give you her answer. The final words in her book, her magnum opus, Woman, Church, and State, are she's talking about how, you know, we're in the midst of a revolution such as the world has never seen. We mark its beginnings. You know, we've now moved into a middle phase of it. And she said the result will be the destruction of every existing institution. The result will be a regenerated world. And I would find it difficult to top that formula for how we create balance and harmony.
One of the things that I think is a great opportunity that's sort of given to us by this time and the filing of the Land Rights Action is this opportunity to look at the history of of this part of the world, and particularly going back to the shores of Onondaga Lake as the location where the peacemaker brought together the 5 nations of the Haudenosaunee and created probably, it's certainly if not the first amongst the first organized sort of democratic government and confederacy in the world, and that this is such an incredibly important history. And when we hear about the history, we some of us have heard about the peacemaker, some of us have heard about Hiawatha and the Taudadaho, but there was also a woman as part of that story who brought the other nations along, or something, some part of that story that I don't really know, and I'm just wondering, Jeanne, if you know something about that, who this woman was and what she did and why she was important in that whole story.
Oh, that was the woman you're talking about. They called her Jigonsase. Is that the one you mean? Yes. Some people call her the Peace Mother. Well, I don't want to tell the story now because it's a long one. But we could have some discussion. And yes, it was a woman who she lived in a certain place. I'll just tell you briefly, and what she did was she made an opportunity for there to be a place where there would be peace, where there would be no kind of fighting or anything, and at the door to her lodge it was said that anybody that had any kind of weapons of war or anything were to leave them at the doorway there and enter and stay as long as they could, as they wanted to, but they were to leave all harsh feelings and arguments outside, and she was very instrumental in helping to spread the word of peace. That's about all I can say about it. It's like I said, it's we can talk about it sometime.
Is there anywhere where it's written down? Where it's, is there?
Yeah, there are some different. I can't think of it right now, but the story is written down in several places, I know, and the site of this actual happening is supposed to have been near Onondaga, which is west of here, almost to Rochester, is it? Near Victor, New York. There was a site there of this enormous, enormous village at one time, and supposedly she was in the area along a trail that was very heavily traveled, so many people came her way.
Sometimes I've heard public officials or school officials make reference to speaking about clearing a policy or talking with the chiefs about a school policy or something like that. And I just wondered if they were correct in just referring to talking with the chiefs about it, or if they should be saying talking with the chiefs and the clan mothers.
Well, the chiefs are the people that are set in place to take care of most of our situations within our community. We have a council of all the chiefs that represent all the clan families, and they sit and make decisions and talk with people that come from outside of our community or inside our community, whether any situations there are to be.
I just want to address Jeanne tonight, using her native name, Kaihata, and she's of the Il clan and same as myself, closely related. And I'd just like to thank her for her words tonight and representing us as the Onondaga Nation and the Haudenosaunee tonight. This is also a question to Sally. With the, it seems like the U.S. Is ready to have maybe possibly thinking about having a woman for president. What do you think? What do you think she would be capable of changing things, changing the direction of this country today?
You know, and as long as we have a system that's not based on balance and harmony, as long as we have a system that, you know, by the time the 1880s came along, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Matilda Joslyn Gage were saying, I'm sick of the song of suffrage. The vote doesn't mean anything. It's become simply one more commodity to be bought and sold in the marketplace. And as long as that's the driving force behind the country, I don't think the gender of the president is going to matter. But I will give you a quote from Elizabeth Cady Stanton when in the 1890s, both Matilda Joslyn Gage and Elizabeth Cady Stanton became concerned about something that they felt was much more dangerous to the United States than women not voting, and that was that religious fundamentalists were trying to take control of the government. And they were trying to place God in the Constitution, created as a Christian nation, put prayer in the public schools, and destroy the wall of separation of church and state that the Founding Fathers has said was absolutely essential for any liberty to happen. That if you have a religious government, you automatically have lost your freedom. And at that point, Elizabeth Cady Stanton said, I would rather live under a government of men alone, where religious freedom was kept intact, than to live under a government where women had gotten the right to vote, and they used that right to destroy religious freedom. And you know, I think as that reflection comes to me of, you know, and Jeanne and I have talked about this, that, you know, part of the way that I really know that these women were influenced and that was a vision for them is the way in which I feel that same sort of empowerment, vision, sense that we can create a different world through my friendships with Haudenosaunee women and men. And I think that the sense that I have is that reflection happens to me in this historic moment is very similar to what happened to Gage and Stanton when they had that reflection 150 years ago, and that is that it's very clear to me that we have to dismantle the institutions that are creating the oppression, and that to create a world of justice and peace and harmony really requires getting away from every system that is hierarchical, that is power over, whether it's an economic or a religious or a political. And I think we really have our work cut out for us, but we today still have, and thank you for the vision of how the world can be lived.
Thank you very much. I want to thank you for this conversation. But I'm a bit worried because I'm concerned that we have this conversation about the Onondaga, and tomorrow we continue to do business as usual. How is it that we can use this to engage the question of reparations, and to raise the question of reparations so that the university, its curriculum, our students, the wider community understand that this is not just something that is based on repressive tolerance, that we do this and we say yes, we support land rights for the Onondaga, but we continue to teach and reproduce ideas that commit the crimes. So that we do not accept that crimes were committed against the Onondaga, and engage the reparations movement I'm talking about a worldwide reparations movement, which includes Onondaga, all indigenous peoples, peoples whose crimes were committed against. So the left, the women's movement, the peace movement, and those who believe in a decency for a common future could embrace this movement and make this something that's ongoing every day and not just once per month.
You know, I was thinking about the clothing too, that right here at Syracuse University up in Special Collections, there's a dress from 1848 from the Oneida community, the utopian community. And the history of women's rights usually talks about the first reform costume being the bloomer costume. Elizabeth Cady Stanton wore it. Her cousin Elizabeth Smith Miller, Gerrit Smith's daughter, was the first, the history books say. But this was 3 years before Elizabeth Smith Miller wore the trousers and the short skirt. And it's not trousers, it's leggings. And they're leggings that connect by buttons to the overdress. You know, it's a, wow, I wonder where white women got the idea of leggings. And Julie, our friend Julie Uticone, was doing research when we first did the Sisters in Spirit exhibit in Seneca Falls for the 150th anniversary. And she found the actual account of the making of that first dress. And they described it in an Indian cabin. We worked until late at night making this dress. And it actually was a cabin that had been Oneida before, the Oneida community.
Yeah, I think there were probably surprises on both sides also for our women to be living in these communities with a sense of equality and humanness, where everybody was the same and everybody had equal rights or equal voice to meet these women who came along who were so severely oppressed that I'm sure it made a lot of impression on our women and developed a lot of friendships. Actually, although things have changed over time, like everything evolves, we still to this day are still matrilineal people, and our children are born to us and follow our clans. We have our ceremonies. We have our women and our men who have been chosen to be the spokespeople for our clan families. We have to work very hard to maintain this because the influence of the world around us is very, very strong, and it would lead many people away. So those of us that follow these ways have to constantly be aware of what's around us and what's threatening our existence all the time. So these things are still going on, and I forgot what I was going to say. I went blank. Well, anyways, I just kind of wanted to mention that, you know, living our life, I guess, myself for a good portion of my life, having been able to live, to follow these ways, probably, I guess I didn't realize how bad things had been for these women when the invasion happened and they came along to live with us. So as we all know, that they don't tell the truth in school. They don't tell the truth in history. There are so many things that we don't know, even about ourselves or each other. So it's been a real awakening for me to be learning all these things from Sally here, and then probably helped me to realize how precious some of our community ways are that we maybe not absolutely take for granted, but that we feel comfortable in, that we haven't had to go through such a long, great fight from the oppression of the dominance.
You know, I was thinking about that time when your mom and you and I spoke in Seneca Falls. It was a one of the Elizabeth Cady Stanton birthday luncheons, and I was really going to town with quoting Elizabeth Cady Stanton and how impressed she was, at the power of these Iroquois women, and how the clan mothers could cut off the horns of the chiefs, and talking about rights, and when your mom started talking about the responsibilities, it was, one of those moments of, boy, culture reflection. The difference between rights and responsibilities, rights are what you talk about when you're wanting them. Responsibilities are what you talk about once you've achieved a gender balance and you need to maintain the harmony, I think.
Yeah.
Was your mom's insight?
Yeah, I think so. I think we need to set that straight, that so many people everywhere are always approaching us women because they're looking for the power. The women have the power. There is no power if there's dominance. We have to all be equal together. And so many times women have come and asking about the responsibilities of the clan mothers and the faith keepers. They look to them as leaders of our people. You could say that they're leaders, but they're very good leaders because they lead us by the heart. Our spirit comes first. They're spiritual teachers. And then other things that people have heard about, like Sally had referred to take the power away from a man, to take the horns off him, to take his power away from him and do away with him, which from my perspective isn't a time where I would look at doing anything to somebody like that as power. I look at a time like that if such a horrible time came in somebody's life. That would mean that a time came in somebody's life that was so sad and so just couldn't even turn it around or to do anything to it because a horrible, some kind of mistake or something happened. And then if this man had been in a position where he had been chosen to be one of the spokespeople for his clan family, then he must have been a very good person, and something happened along the way. So I look at that time as a very sad time. It would make me really, really sad in my heart and feel bad for these people who had to take part in that. So that's another thing that needs to be straightened up when people look at the power of ripping the horns off of somebody's head. It would be so sad. It would be like almost like ending somebody's life, because this person would be banished from us because whatever happened was so bad. It couldn't be turned around, and you should know that before that time came, there was probably extensive time spent talking and trying to reconcile this situation and repair it, and probably a lot of people were affected. So we need to think about that. It's not a time of power. It's a time of great sadness, I would say.
Mm-hmm. That knowing you, the constant mirroring of the reflection of who I am in the society, the government, the world in which I live, mirrored from the reflection of yours, is always just an amazement. I was thinking about when you were talking about history, we haven't always learned the truth or the understanding.
They don't tell us the truth in school. We all know that. And
and beyond that, it's the illusion that we know, and the higher our degree, the bigger the illusion of knowing. And and I think about when I never set out to find this connection. It it carried me kicking and screaming and resisting all the way, and that's really been a reflection to think about why didn't I see this. First chapter of Matilda Joslyn Gage's Woman, Church, and State, her major book, she talks about never was justice more perfect, never was civilization higher. And she's talking about the Haudenosaunee. Well, I was trying to figure out how especially Gage and Stanton, the two most radical, I think, in the true sense of that term, historically, that they radical reformers in this area talked about the deadly tree of oppression, and you cut it off at the roots. You can't just cut off the limbs that grow stronger. You can't make minor liberal reforms. You have to dig it out at the roots, hence radical. But trying to figure out why these radical reformers who were looking at digging it out at the roots, destroying the system of oppression, so that there would be that balance and harmony and nobody having power over anybody else. How did they get their vision? Because if you're living in a world where the hegemony, the absolute nature of how existence is defined, doesn't have little cracks in it that you can, open up. It was so absolute. How did they get the idea that it was possible to create a different world, and for not just the condition of women to be different, but that, the system of power over other people would be destroyed? And, I should have seen the Haudenosaunee. I mean, it was, she's screaming it in the first chapter, first 7 pages of her book, and I didn't see it. And the thing that I've had to recognize and continue to is that my racism is constantly interfering with my scholarship. It constantly gets in the way of it. And, I put that out maybe in a more general way, thinking, well, I wasn't the only one looking at this information. Why hasn't this connection been just seen by so many people before? And is it the same reason that, I came at this quite honestly with thinking without even knowing I was thinking, what do Indian women have to teach white women anyway? They were beasts of burden. I didn't even know where the Iroquois nations were when I started this work. What was Matilda talking about?
You're asking me?
No, this is...
Well, I'll tell you something. Well, think about this then. When those women came here, they had invaded our Aboriginal territory where we were living and came into our communities, moved right into our communities. Their husbands were missionaries. And well, what are missionaries come to do? Mm-hmm. Right?
Yep.
They came to tell us, we who are living here, that we're not living right, for one thing. We're not praying to the right God that they brought with them. We're not oppressed.
Mm-hmm. And the first thing was to turn, the irony that at that moment that white women got the vision and the strength and the courage and the idea that it would be possible to live in a different way from Haudenosaunee women. Along come the missionaries, same moment, and
they came with them.
pushing and forcing. And one of the things that the missionaries were most upset about was the autonomy of the women. Mm-hmm. Made them nuts. They, the women council that the Quakers called with the Seneca in 1845, story about it in the newspaper, the Standard, the Onondaga Standard, the Post-Standard. And they said, we've done everything we can to help you save your land, we've done all this stuff. Now what you have to do is that the women need to come into the home, the women need to stay in the home, and the men need to go out in the field. And you need to straighten up. So there, it's the terrible truth of the way that even the best-hearted, the missionaries were doing this with the idea that, we're saving you, we're helping you, you're all heathens, you're going to go to hell if you don't believe like we believe.
Right.
And so we're doing you a favor, and that the most damage can be done.
Exactly. That's what they've done all over the world, wherever they went. Anywhere there were any indigenous people, they approached them the same way that they did us. Mm-hmm. That you're wrong, you're not thinking right because you're not thinking the same way we are. You're not worshiping whatever you are. It wasn't right, and it was they called it heathen, and it was wrong, and they did everything they could to change us and to dispose of us. After coming into our communities and I guess convincing a certain amount of people that to follow that way, and then they did this whole campaign of taking whole families of children right out of the community and taking them far away to schools where they raised them in a military-like type situations. Whole families of children spent their whole childhood taken away from their families, from the love of their mothers and their fathers, from their families, community, were taught how to speak English, cut their hair, scrubbed them up with some brown soap, and
beat them if they spoke their own.
Many children died. They were never able to run away. They ran away from school. There were so many horrible instances. You could talk till the end of time to talk about all the sad stories about these children that came home after they got out of that school. They came back and they were washed of their culture. They didn't know their language. They were not close with their family. They lacked any kind of affectionate treatment. They were beaten. They were trained to do some kind of menial vocational jobs for the most part. Although there were a few that came home playing the piano or the violin, which at that point in time had not much value in our community. That's part of the whole campaign that went on. So we've had to survive all that and bring those people back home, and some people actually hid their children in order to keep them home. It would break your heart to hear the stories of these people that tell about having to spend their whole childhood in a barrack someplace and listen to the babies crying and know about them being buried in a row outside someplace so far away from home. That was part of that whole campaign where they came in and tried to eradicate us. But we're still here. We still have our clans and our families. We practice our ceremonies, our religious, spiritual ceremonies. All year round, at the certain specific times of the year, we give thanksgiving. Every single one of our ceremonies are thanksgivings for different types of the year, for everything on earth, the food, for each other, for the warm breezes, for the snow. It goes on and on. We have to always constantly be thankful and to keep ourselves spiritually strong. That's part of the reason why we're still here and we're never going to leave. We identify each other. We know who each other is by our clan families. We know each other's names. We have our own names and our own languages that have very special meanings within our clans. So these are the kind of stuff these women saw, and it hasn't stopped. Some of it might have stopped for some people for a certain portion of time, but we're still here and we'll still always be here. So I'm glad that all you people are here to listen to this and to realize that here we are. We live just minutes away. It takes about 12 minutes for me to get home from here. We all need to know more about each other and know each other and be friends. So these are the kind of things that these women had to see. I also need to say that all women, regardless of whoever we are, we have all the basic thoughts and feelings inside of us. And not only the women, but the men do too. I see so many of these different seminars. Now this series is going on, the second series, it's about women. We should have one about men too. If we're talking about equality, we need to have something for everybody. Because we need to all carry the load together. Go ahead.
You know what? You know, when you're talking about the boarding school experience, I was thinking about one of the ways that I, in my culture, have learned to think is either or, this, separation. And part of that is that I always like to think that the bad people are those people, you know, and I'm the good people. And there's not a really good system in our thought, in our spiritual thought, and in our social and political thought for incorporating within ourselves both and, you know, that which is progressive and that which is oppressive. But I think each of us are carriers, each of us from the Euro-Christian culture are carriers of both. And I think about Alice Fletcher, you know, that woman who, she was a suffragist. She was at the International Council of Women in 1888. And Stanton was there, Gage was there, Anthony was there, everybody was there, and a bunch of women from Europe. First time women gathered internationally to talk about the rights of women. And Alice Fletcher talked about Native women, and she talked about, well, she started off, I think, with a story about when she was with some, let's see, they were Omaha women, and the Omaha Nation, and one of the women gave somebody a horse, and Alice said that without thinking, she said to the woman, well, aren't you going to check with your husband first? You know, and this Native woman just started laughing, and the merriment in her eyes, and then she tells all her friends, and they're all just laughing at Alice. And she said, I just forgot for a minute where I was. You know, I forgot that I was with Indian women. And then she goes on to say that, and she uses this story sort of as an example, and goes on to talk about how she's been told by a number of Native women and men as well, and Sitting Bull actually was one of the people that told her this, that they feared what would happen when citizenship and civilization, the Christianization and civilization process that the government was undergoing, was forcing on Indians at the time. And she said that they feared what would happen to women most under that, because the men would lose their Indianness, but the women would lose both their identity as Indians, but also they would lose their position as women. And she talked about the crimes that committed against women, that if they were done by an Indian man, they would be treated so severely, you know, that the woman's rape, marital rape, battering, that sort of thing, that the woman's male relatives, brothers, fathers, and so on, would take care of it, you know, would deal with the perpetrator, and he would not do it again. But she said under United States law, nothing will happen to the man because he's perfectly within his rights to do those things to his wife, his property. But who will be arrested are her male relatives, because they will have committed the crime of injuring, you know, another man. And Alice Fletcher really got it in this way, but Alice Fletcher grabbed kids, attracted kids, seduced kids, I don't even know all the ways, you know, made it so appealing to them that they went off to Carlisle. She took a lot of kids from their homes and sent them to Carlisle, and again, thinking she was doing the very best thing for them.
I think we're out of time.
How are we time-wise?
I think we're out of time. Or say early.
We're waiting for a signal from Linda about whether we should stop or keep going. You know, one last thing I just wanted to mention was that in that regard of the dual nature, you know, that at the same time that the women were getting a vision of something different, they were also agents of oppression, that Matilda Joslyn Gage's son-in-law, L. Frank Baum, is another example of that. That he wrote 14 books that are absolute models of diversity and models of a vision of what the world can be like. And yet when he was living in South Dakota at the time of the massacre at Wounded Knee, he wrote 2 editorials calling for the extermination of the entire Sioux Nation. And I think that's sort of...
I don't think his boundaries were there either. I mean, if he didn't like the Sioux, he probably didn't like anybody. Right?
I don't know. It's, you know, it's so complicated because there was the good Indian, bad Indian idea too. That you know, the Haudenosaunee were the civilized Indians, but the Sioux were the savages. There was that pitting groups against each other as well. It's a complicated story.